Hello, friends and readers. We are going to start talking about what are poems made of. This is our standard RL 2.5, where we refer to parts of poems when writing or speaking about a text using terms such as stanzas, speakers, and more. When we are doing this, we are describing how poems build on what we are reading. So we did this with stories, but now we are going to do this with poems. This week's vocabulary is the speaker, stanza, poetry, verse, visualize, and structure. When we're talking about the speaker, we're talking about who is talking in the poem and who is telling the poem. Stanza is what would look like a little paragraph, but in a poem it's called a stanza, so it's a group of lines. Poetry is a form of written work. A verse is what poems are made of. Visualize is what we do when we think of a poem because we make a beautiful movie in our head. And the structure is how it is written. So when we look at poems, we think about what are poems made of. Well, when you understand parts of poems, you can see how lines and stanzas build on what came before. Many poems tell stories. Like stories, they have a speaker who talks to the reader. They also have a beginning and middle and end. Poems are made up of lines called verses. A group of verses are called a stanza. A stanza and a poem work together to tell a story. Each stanza tells an important part of a poem's story, and stanzas build on each other to present ideas and tell a story. So when we read the poem below, we're going to think about how this poem was written, and then how the first stanza and the second stanza are related. So just like a story having a beginning, middle, and end, so do poems. And when you introduce a poem, you're telling a story in a new way. So this poem is called A Penguin's Life. In this poem, there are two stanzas. There's stanza 1, because it's this group, and then there's stanza 2, which is this group of lines. One line or one verse is right here. So, a penguin's life. I, a bird with little wings, but they don't make me fly. The air above is not for me. The ocean is my sky. So, all of this stanza was about the penguin in the water. In icy seas I soup and swore, a swimmer fast and bold. You'd swim fast if you were me. The water sure is cold. So that is stanza 2. It's talking about soaring through the water. So in paragraph number 1, or stanza, should I say, we are talking about introducing the penguin and how the penguin is in the water. Number 2 is telling us more about how the penguin swims and soars through the icy cold water. So stanzas tell us different parts and build on one another. This is all about a penguin's life. When we're looking at stanza 1, we learn that penguins cannot fly. And in stanza 2, penguins, however, are very fast swimmers. This poem is about how a penguin is a bird that cannot fly, but it can swim. It's kind of a silly poem. When we're looking at it, we know the speaker is a penguin. We know that there are some rhymes in this poem. Fly in sky, bold and cold. So when we're looking at poems, we're looking at how it's written. And in this case, it's writing about the penguin's life. When we're thinking about poetry, we can ask ourselves, who are the speakers? In the poem, what is the main idea of each stanza, and how do they build on one another? Well, the first thing we saw in our stanza was that penguins can't fly, which then leads us to stanza number 2, where it explains that instead of flying through the sky, our penguins swim through icy cold waters. So when you're looking at poems, you're doing a mini story almost in your mind and looking at it that way. So we want to explore poetry this week and think about how the author has written it, how stanzas build on one another. So, just like before, we talked about how we have to know that penguins don't fly so that we can understand that they are very good swimmers. So, read more poems and enjoy.